Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a college coach conversation. We are in the middle of October. It is the busiest month for us here at College Coach. As you can imagine, so many students are scrambling to get their application materials ready in order to submit. And we can imagine that for many of you listeners, if you're a parent of a senior, well, it's a pretty busy time around your home as well. We want to tackle exactly what you're up to right now as you're pulling together all of these application materials with our first segment. And so to do that, we're going to welcome the show's producer, who occasionally will make cameos on the show as a feature expert, Lauren Randall. Hey, it's great to see you this morning.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
It's great to have you here. And I just like gave away that we record at different times than we actually broadcast, because I said morning, but I said, anyway, that's not important. We can edit that out in post. So Lauren, November 1st is the big day in our world. And I think historically it had been January 1st, but so many more schools these days are offering early action. Early decision is a big topic of conversation. And so a lot of people are looking at that November 1st date on their calendar as the big time when they need to have a lot of their materials submitted. So we wanted to spend some time today just talking about how to get yourself in order to be able to make those submissions at that point. So we're right in the middle of October. What are you telling your students as they're staring down these deadlines and thinking about them arriving within a couple of weeks? Are there major words of advice that you're imparting across those kids?
Well, if I have to be totally honest here, it's just do it. I mean, I don't know what's going on this year, but I think we were chatting within our team recently and saying, how does October feel compared to September and compared to last year? And I said, September felt a little bit quiet, which scares me because that means October is going to be nuts. So I'm feeling like there's a lot of procrastination going on. So I really want to talk about, the time that there is left, because there is still some time here, what you can be doing and whether you should be rushing to get it in, whether that's worth it. But making the most of this remaining time. And let's not forget though, November 1st is what we say, kind of that first big deadline. There's a few outliers. I mean, there's some October 15th out there. Right. There's rolling admissions. So, don't forget to actually watch your own deadlines for your application list.
Now, I think that the first deadline that is like a drop dead deadline is University of Florida, if I'm not mistaken, on November 1st. And so we are talking about early action deadlines. When we talk about the 10-15 deadline for UNC or for Georgia residents with Georgia Tech, if you miss these early action deadlines, you can, of course, still apply a regular decision. But why do we encourage students, Lauren, to aim for early action and to submit applications by that date, if at all possible?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want you to enjoy your senior year, right? The longer this hangs over you, the more stress that there is. Your parents are going to harp on you when you want to go to homecoming games and things like that. Well, have you done your college essay? Right. Get this off your plate. This, for the most part, it's one big essay, some application work. It can be a lot of work depending on your application list, but if you chip away at it, it is manageable. But if you let this go, I want you to move on with your life.
That's right.
That's one part of it. The other part of it is typically, not always, depends on the school, but typically, if you apply early action, you're more likely to get a response earlier in right. return. And that's really helpful. First of all, I hope it's positive. I hope it builds your self-esteem. Yeah. You feel you're built up. You can chat about, your future with your friends and family. It's really exciting. But let's say it's not good news. Hopefully that still gives you enough time to make some other decisions to submit other applications. So, having that response early is helpful. At some places, some schools, there can be a statistical or, an acceptance rate difference. It can help. That really varies by school. So that's another thing that we usually talk about. Is there any strategic advantage about applying early?
Yeah, that's right. And, I'm reminded of a student I had a couple of years ago who was a wonderfully talented student. And she just so happened to be applying to schools that didn't have any early action options for her. And in mid-December, late December, all of her friends at school were hearing back from from places they'd applied early action, getting into schools. And she was worried just by virtue of the fact that she wasn't hearing back from her colleges. Now, there's no reason that she should have been, because they didn't offer early action, so she couldn't have applied that way. But if you have this opportunity, you don't want to be in a position where your friends at school got in and heard they got into a school that you didn't make the deadline for, and now you're waiting until regular decision. It just is going to drag things out such that you'll be much more stressed, I think, than you would be otherwise. There's also an element, Lauren, of just like, you've got a lot of work to do across all of your applications. And there is a way of naturally segmenting that workload according to these deadlines, so that you do a handful of schools before November 1st, and then you do some after November 1st. How do you recommend that students put their colleges in order right now? Let's say I'm looking at 9 or 10 schools that I want to apply to. How should I think about putting those in order of how I'm going to tackle the applications?
That's a great question. And I don't know that there is a correct one size fits all, because I think there's a couple of different scenarios here. Yeah. First of all, you need to know what application. It's not always up to you, right? If the school offers early decision or regular decision or early action or rolling, you need to just compile that information. Know for your list what is offered and when. So that's first. I usually say, so it would make sense to prioritize based on your top choices, what you're most excited about. But I usually say, let's not miss any freebies here.
Yeah.
If there are any on your list that don't have significant supplemental work, that's a no-brainer. Get that application off your plate, because it's just the Common App work and then some form questions, no actual additional writing. So I get so frustrated with students when they say, oh, well, I didn't submit that school because it was not the top of my list. So what, right?
Get it out of here.
It's on your list for a reason. It made it there, so you can get that off.
And I had a student that last month finished her personal essay, and we were happy with it and wrapped it. And basically within the next week, she said, so I've submitted my application to 3 schools now because none of them required supplements. And it was great. She was like, I've applied to college. Like, I've taken that first step, and it didn't take any extra work. So definitely look for some of those freebies that are going to be easier for you to tackle at the start. Then where do you turn, Lauren?
Then I do think it should be based on your own priorities within the rest of your list. So, where, and I guess also how much work you've done to this point. I mean, we're at mid-October. Right. So if your list now contains 10 early action schools, all with supplemental essays, and you haven't started any, that's going to be an upward battle by November 1st. So I would look at it based on, your interest in the schools, but also maybe your chances, just choosing the ones that's the furthest, stretch for you based on, your measures or based on the selectivity of the school might not be the best option, as opposed to banking on those targets, which, can be a toss-up when it comes to regular decision. So I don't think it's just based on how you feel about the school. I think it's also being smart about where it falls on your list, and, having some for early action that is distributed across those different categories of selectivity. That's
a great point, because you said earlier that when you get some early action decisions back in December, it can help you in some ways to recalibrate if you've heard from schools and you didn't get in. But if you apply only to the farthest reaches that you have by early action, that decision isn't really telling you anything. You're not learning a whole lot from that, because those are schools that were unlikely to begin with. But if you have a better distribution across that early action list, now you might be able to say, okay, well, I got into the schools I was counting on. My target accepted me, so that's pretty good. And I didn't get into one of my reaches. So I'm feeling pretty good about where things are right now. That can't happen if you only apply to reach schools across the list. What about, sometimes students will consider the restrictive early action options. There are 4 schools, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, that offer this. And it's somewhat limiting. What do you think about students thinking about those 4 schools as an early action option, especially if it prevents them from applying early action to other institutions?
Well, I think the best way to answer this is to give an anecdote here from a student I worked with in the past couple of years. She came to me on October 1st for a November 1st restrictive Stanford early action application. She she's incredible, right? She is a strong writer, a reflective writer. She knew herself. She knew what she was going for. So just to give our listeners some perspective, this is an awesome student, had everything going for her. But as of October 1st, she had done no work yet. She worked for the entire month of October with me just on her Stanford application, nothing else. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that it was a great application. Could I have used a little bit more time with her? Yes, because there's also life going on. Right? She's also a student, and there are tests and homework. So it took her 1 full month just to chip away that one application. She could submit no other early action applications. It was a little frustrating, I won't lie. And I'll also be honest, so now we're mid-October. If she had come mid-October and said, I'm applying without having started for Stanford, it was not going to be worth her time. So, the point here is, how do you know if you're ready to submit? Well, sometimes it's the opposite. How do you know if you're not ready to submit? It would have been not in no way humanly possible to get that together to the standard that Stanford wants within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really answers your question or not. But.
No. I mean, I think that is really helpful. And it was one thing that I was going to get to a little bit later was like, when you're staring down these deadlines, how do you know? And I want to come back to that. But I do think also, if you're the student that you worked with, I think if she's looking at Stanford early action, restrictive early action, and then she's got a lot of public schools with early action on her list, then applying restrictive early action to Stanford only limits her in terms of the distribution of time. And you're sitting there as an educator and saying, well, I know this is your priority, but you could put a perfect application together and still not get in. And it's not quite the tip that early decision gives, where it really changes your chances of getting into that particular school. And so, you want to follow that student's priority and what their top school is, but you also want to say, look, there are these other schools that you might have 4 answers in your back pocket by December, instead of this one answer that might not even be a yes. And so I think that is an important question for students to think about as they're balancing those restrictive early action options, because they're not just limiting in terms of the number of schools where you can apply EA. They're limiting because those are all beastly supplements. Stanford has 8 essays, Yale has 8, Harvard has 1 that's so long with no real guidance or limitation on what to do. Princeton's really tough. So keep that in mind, I think, as you're looking at it. So that is the big question, right, that you mentioned, which is, how do you know when you're ready to submit? Let's say it's a week and a half from now, it's October 25th. People are getting ready for Halloween, but they're also getting ready for November 1st. How should I know that I'm ready? And when is it the right time to say, you know what, I would love to apply early action, but I should wait for regular decision? How do you make that hard call?
Yeah. So let's start there. If you have not done any work yet, and you are now staying up every night, or you're just not confident that this is your very best work, it might not be worth it. Yeah. Especially, I would say, if the school has a very, very low acceptance rate, you don't just throw out an application, right? It doesn't work that way. You say, oh, let me see if it sticks. Like it's not going to, right? The quality of your application needs to be phenomenal. So that might be one that's just, you're not ready because you haven't given yourself the time that application needs. Now, if you are on the flip side, you have anguished over this since, spring of junior year, and you've worked with your school counselor or, your English teacher, whoever that somebody else is for you, because I really do believe in somebody else at minimum proofreading it for you.
Yes.
But maybe it's, it's somebody that you really trust. Does this sound, it's not just for grammatical errors. Does it sound like me? So if you've been through that editing process, this is not your first draft, and you've looked at these essays over and over again for months on end, it is time to let go. And that is scary. I have a couple students right now that are emailing that I have signed off on these essays long ago. And they say, well, I changed some punctuation, or I'm really afraid of a typo. It is nerve-wracking. It's a lot of work, but it is time to let go.
It's time to push that button.
Not let go.
Yeah. No, but you're right. I mean, you do have to come to a point where you say, this is really solid. I'm confident in this. Maybe there's something I could change if I was given infinite amounts of time. But you also have all these other schools that you need to work on. So, hanging on to one application is going to delay your ability to start to focus on some others. And there are very few students right now who are totally on top of everything, where they're just kind of biding their time to submit their handfuls of applications. Now, in our next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about essay writing for the personal essay. And I think that, if people are still in a position where they're working on the personal essay, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to hit these early action deadlines. But I want to go back to an initial point that you made, Lauren, which was look up the deadlines, figure out what the rounds of admission are going to be. There are some schools that have early action November 15th deadlines. Where would you recommend that students go for the most reliable information along those deadlines and those rounds of admission for the schools they're interested in?
The Common Application is the easiest spot. I mean, the dashboard will tell you what the deadlines are. But otherwise, it's going to be the admissions website for each individual college. That's just a little more tedious. But as long as the school is in the Common App, it will give all the rounds that they offer and the deadlines.
And we are very big believers that students should really drive this process. But if you're a parent out there trying to help your student, the one thing on the Common App that you can help them with is adding schools to their dashboard and verifying some of these deadlines. That's a great way to provide some support. When it comes to actually filling out the Common App, that's for the student to do. But you can actually look up these deadlines and help manage the project a little bit. All right, Lauren, I guess we should just wish everybody good luck because we got 2 weeks to go, including you and me. So good luck to you.
Good luck and Godspeed.
Yeah. All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to talk about essay examples and the personal statement and whether these are worthwhile or not, and should you use them? And I don't know, we don't even know what the segment's going to be, but we're excited to do it. So stick around. We'll be right back.